So now that NBA free agency has sort of started to die down, I just want to go through and react to the majority or hopefully all of the signings that have so far been made by all of the teams in the association. So some of the first things that I want to point out are very early on in this free agency cycle. A lot of teams just retained their players. And so some of the first major movement can be seen later on in the evening, and one of the first ones that I remember at least taking place last night was Dorian Finney-Smith signing with the Rockets, and I really like that deal for the Rockets because whenever you surround a guy like Alperen Sengun, who is a very good playmaker and passer, and you bring in a guy like Kevin Durant, and you bring in you bring in Dorian Finney-Smith, you bring in a ton of great catch and shoot shooters as well as just overall shooters, and that then allows for Sengun to take a leap, and then as well a guy like Amen Thompson, who he is a very athletic finisher. His shooting isn't exactly a skill set; it isn't exactly a strong point, but he too is another great playmaker. So if you have at least two players who you can surround them with really good catch and shoot as well as off the dribble or pull up shooters, I think that leads to a ton of success. And the Rockets have already been a number 2 seed, and I think they've improved on what already was a very good season last year. And so I think that the Rockets are going to be looking very scary next year. And then the next major move was Jake LaRavia to the Lakers, which, I mean, Jake LaRavia is a pretty good player. I mean, he's a good role player, and the Lakers' biggest issues have been big man is getting a good solid lob threat, and I don't think LaRavia is necessarily a guy that you would like to be starting, but he is a very serviceable and high quality player. So I don't mind the Lakers doing that. And then later on in the evening, the Mavericks signed D'Angelo Russell, and I really like that deal for the Mavericks because a 2-year, $13 million deal is not a lot of money relative to the rest of the roster and how much they're making. But you can get a guy who, at least a couple years ago, was a starting point guard on a team that made it to the Western Conference Finals. Now, that was a couple years ago, and he's obviously regressed a little bit, but you can still get a very serviceable starting point guard for a very cheap total. I think that that's a very successful move there by Nico Harrison and the Mavericks. And then the big one, the big overall trade, was the Nuggets trading away their catch and shoot absolute sniper of a player in Michael Porter Jr. and the 2020 or the 2032 first round pick to the Brooklyn Nets for Cam Johnson. I like that deal for the Nuggets and for the Nets because for the Nuggets, outside of Nikola Jokic, I don't think you care about picks. He is the most important priority going forward because the Nuggets are not a big market like LA or Miami. They will not see another star as good as Nikola Jokic in a very long time. More often than not, more likely than not, they won't get a star like Nikola Jokic. And so you're upgrading at a position where Michael Porter Jr., sure, he had a shoulder injury last year, and that obviously affected his shot, but he didn't perform very well. He didn't perform up to the capacity that he is capable of and was at whenever they won the championship a few years ago. But you upgrade almost a 1-to-1 upgrade because Cam Johnson plays very similar to Michael Porter Jr., but they're both just 3-point snipers. And at least a couple years ago, Michael Porter Jr. was a very good defender. So I love this move for the Nuggets because you're improving and you're not shaking up the roster too much because both of these two players play the same way. One of them is just better than the other at it. And then a few minutes later in the evening, the Grizzlies went out and signed Ty Jerome from the Cavaliers for a $28 million deal. And I love that move for the Grizzlies because you get a guy who could be a very serviceable and good point guard whenever Ja Morant won't be there, whether it be due to injuries or extracurricular things. And you didn't have to break the bank for it. You got a very good player who's a good shooter and can be a good playmaker and someone who's able to dictate the pace of the offense, and you bring him in for $28 million. I think that's a fantastic move. And then Bruce Brown, going back to the Nuggets, Bruce Brown returns to the Nuggets. And I mean, I really like that move. Obviously, Bruce Brown on his Instagram has been putting up stories on how he wants to go back. And listen, he was a very good player for them. I'll remember him where on a breakaway dunk against the Heat in the finals, and he throws it down, and I believe he got fouled by either Jimmy Butler or Duncan Robinson. I remember he got fouled while going up for a dunk attempt, and it was like almost a nail in the coffin. And Bruce Brown's a very serviceable role player and pretty good at what he does, and so he gets to go back to a team where he won a championship a couple years ago, and at least he has chemistry with Nikola Jokic, and I think the Nuggets are building on what was not even a great season because you ended up having to fire your coach, but you took the Oklahoma City Thunder to 7 games. So I don't know how you would grade the Nuggets season, but they keep continuing to improve. And it's the end of the Kevon Looney era in Golden State, as he signed a 2-year, $16 million deal with the Pelicans. If I'm Kevon Looney, I don't know why you would want to sign that unless it's the most amount of money, which in that case, go get the bag. But New Orleans isn't going to be a contending team, I don't think at least. And they just traded a very favorable pick for Derek Queen. So now they have kind of a overabundance at the big man position, because if they want to go with the small ball lineup and put Zion there, or if they want to keep him power forward, which is what, I mean, they should do, whether or not you get Kelly Olynyk coming back to the team, whether or not you have any of the injury luck, whether or not you have a Carlo, I think it's Carlo Matovich is how you pronounce his name, whether he can continue to take another step. I just think that bringing in a guy like Kevon Looney, who's very good at a couple of things, but isn't really great at much else outside of it. Whenever you have Zion Williamson as a number one option, you need shooting, and Kevon Looney isn't that. So I don't really understand why the Pelicans would do this. And I mean, obviously they see something that I don't, but I don't understand why they would offer this deal. And speaking of backup big men, which are in a premium this free agency cycle, Luke Kornet to the Spurs. I love this deal for both parties. And it is a four-year, $41 million deal. And the Spurs, with Wemby, whenever you have a guy who is this young and this good, you have to at least go and contend every year while they're on a smaller scale deal. So I absolutely love going out and bringing in Luke Kornet, who has championship experience. And let's not forget that one of the last games that he played of the season was where he was kind of owning the Knicks, where he was just no shot that went up, he wasn't there to just swat it back down. He is an excellent shot blocker, and he is an excellent defender. Now, he isn't a great shooter, but he's a backup big man, and that's really all you can ask for, is someone who knows how to play their role, is someone who contributes to winning, and has a experience with winning championships, or a championship. And then, the ultimate backup big man of this free agency cycle, who everyone thought would go to the Lakers, or pretty much every team would be in the running for, Clint Capella goes back to the Rockets on a 3-year, $21.5 million deal. I don't know how I feel about this because, again, you have Alperen Sengun, who I'm assuming is the guy that they're going to be building around for the long-term future, even though he's not the best player on the team because that's Kevin Durant. But you just re-signed Steven Adams to a decent-sized deal, so then why are you going out and bringing in a guy like Capella who plays very similar to Steven Adams? I mean, I think that I would have preferred them not give over $7 million a year to someone who isn't necessarily a need. I would have thought that would be going more to shooters and overall more flexible players who you can move throughout the lineup. But I mean, I get it, but I'm not the biggest fan of it because I don't see how you can really maximize a lineup where at the end of last year, the Rockets were going with the two big lineup where they were putting Şengün at the 4 and then Steven Adams at the 5. But that lineup, and not much changes between if you put Steven Adams and Capella out there. Not much changes. They're both the same tier of defender, rebounder, and scorer. So I don't know why you would want to keep Şengün at the 4. And I guess if you would want to try and go with a larger lineup, but that only works against certain teams that play small. If you have a team who's very switchable and is able to go around and pickpocket or just swarm a team like the Rockets, where you don't have insane shooting from your two big men, I don't know why you would continue to do that, and I don't know what the point of bringing in Capella would be for that. Again, they're seeing something that I don't, because I don't necessarily love this fit unless they are truly committed to playing Şengün at the 4 and then putting Kevin Durant at the 3. And then I guess that would mean putting Amen at the 1, which right there, that would mean you have 3 guys who aren't great shooters, and that wouldn't really work. So I don't think that's necessarily a great idea. And then for the Pistons, bringing in Caris LeVert on a 2-year, $29 million deal. I think that this deal came to be because of Malik Beasley's possible shenanigans in regards to gambling, because I think they play a very similar way where they're both very good shooters and pretty good scorers. I don't mind the deal for the Pistons, because if Malik Beasley did gamble and he did do what he is accused of, looking at what happened recently with the whole Jonte Porter betting scandal, he's not going to play for you, and he's not going to maybe even play again. So if you can bring in a guy like Caris LeVert, who's a good scorer and is a pretty good shooter, surrounding Cade Cunningham with weapons is a very good idea. And then, again, this has kind of been a running theme of the backup big man is a premium. Brook Lopez, everyone thought he'd be going to the Lakers, but he's going to a different LA team in the Clippers for 2 years, $18 million. I like the deal because it's not that expensive, and you bring in a very, very good defender and a good 3-and-D center, which is a very sought-after archetype. He's able to stretch out the floor, which then means if you want to, I don't know how you would deal with the slow-footedness, but if you wanted to, you could put Zubac at the 4, and then you could try to see if Kawhi plays, put him at the 3, and then put Harden at the 1 and Norman Powell at the 2. I mean, I think that's a pretty good size lineup. I just don't know about the speed and defense. But bringing in Brook Lopez at the very least means your bench unit would be very, very serviceable on defense, as well as not having to sacrifice offense. So I think that's a very, very good move. And then Luka Garza to the Celtics. He's another backup big man. I mean, it's not a large deal, but it's worth taking a flyer on. The Celtics have a history of developing talent very well, and Garza was a guy who played very well in college and has had some time to learn behind Rudy Gobert, which I don't know if that'll help you offensively, but it will help defensively. And I'm just not going to talk about LeBron James because I don't think he will request a trade, and even if not many teams can really afford LeBron, and I don't think it would make sense to trade away assets for someone who is 40, going to be 42 years or 41 years old by the middle of the season. I wouldn't be willing to do that. And plus, I know he has a no trade clause. So even if the Lakers are able to get a deal, LeBron has to be in favor of it, which, I mean, he's one of the few guys who has it, but I don't think LeBron's going to end up on another team. I think he's going to be a Laker for the rest of his career. And then Nickeil Alexander-Walker signs with the Hawks, and then this was a sign-and trade with the Hawks and the Timberwolves, and the Hawks are giving up a second-round pick in cash for Nickeil Alexander-Walker. If you're the Timberwolves, at least you got something out of it. Instead of losing him for nothing, you can get money to buy a new fax machine. That's a Kyle Korver reference, where he was traded for a fax machine, and you can get a pick. I don't mind it if you're going to let him go. And I think the Hawks have had a phenomenal offseason so far because they haven't really had to give up many assets to go out and acquire talent, because they've already brought in Kristaps Porzingis, who is almost a perfect player to pair with Trae Young, where you have a nice lob threat because of his size, but you can also run multiple different lineups where you can play smaller because of Porzingis' size, but he's also a very good shooter. The only thing with him is injuries and his amount of money that he's being paid. But if you're the Hawks in the East is completely wide open, at least at this point, before any of the trade or other dominoes have fallen. This is the moment where you can decide to go all in and try to capitalize on this Trae Young era. And bringing in a guy like Nickeil Alexander-Walker, who's a great defender and a pretty good three-point shooter, for a deal that isn't that bad. I mean, a 4-year, $62 million deal isn't even that atrocious. It's not like you're going to be paying him $30 million. You're paying him pretty good money for a pretty good player. So I think that's a very good deal for both parties, because at least the Timberwolves got something out of the deal. Tyus Jones to the Magic. I mean, he's a good backup point guard. I mean, he wasn't great with Phoenix last year, but no one on that team really was. I don't know anything about the Euro League, so I don't know how to break down Nigel Hayes Davis of Fenerbahce, of the EuroLeague champion, because there's been a bit of a mixed history there. Because you'll get a guy like Sasha Vezenkov. I'm pretty sure it's roughly how you say it, where it just doesn't work out for the Kings, or you'll get a guy like Vasily Micic with the Suns, where he's okay. I mean, obviously this would be a possibly a developmental or a veteran leadership type of move, and I don't mind it, but I'm not an expert on how he plays. I don't know. And then later on in the evening, Luke Kennard, who was with I believe he was with the Clippers last year, but he's a great shooter, going to the Hawks to pair up with Trae Young. It's very clear that the Hawks are capitalizing on Trae Young's passing and this new era of being able to have everyone out on the perimeter and allow Trae Young to be able to facilitate the offense, because I believe Trae Young was first in assists last year, in assists per game. And you compare that with shooting of Trae Young and allowing him to have more flexibility and mobility and allow for more creativity to run with the offense. I think that's great. I mean, I think they're really capitalizing and getting assets that can help now and for the future. And so I think the Hawks are having a phenomenal offseason, and I love this deal because it's not that expensive either for a great shooter. $11 million. Okay. I mean, that's not an insane amount of money. So you're paying a total of around 30 million for two good shooters and one great 3-and-D guy. I say two good shooters because both we have a Shams alert coming in right now. Josh Minot of the Boston Celtics, good for him. He's a developmental player for the Timberwolves. But going back to the Hawks, I think that if you can pay a good 3-and-D and a good three-point shooter to pair with an undersized guard, I think that is just phenomenal. And that's exactly what they've done. And hopefully it's what they continue to do, because it's just been worked out great for them. Mason Plumlee was with the Suns last year, going back to the Hornets where he was with them a couple years ago. 1 year, 3.6. He's a good center, and the Hornets need centers because after they traded away Yusuf Nurkic to go pick up Colin Sexton, for a period there, it was Taj Gibson. Taj Gibson would be a starting center if they don't want to go with their second round pick. I think they took Ryan Kalkbrenner, if I'm not mistaken. But they needed big men depth, and Mason Plumlee is a pretty good big man just to be a backup, so I don't mind that at all. And then Taurean Prince staying with the Bucks. He's a good role player, and it's not to an expensive deal, so I think that's a pretty good deal. Jordan Clarkson is expected to sign with the Knicks for a vet minimum, is what I've heard. I love that deal. You can get a good score, and the Knicks' biggest problem has been depth. And you bring in a guy who was a sixth man of the year candidate, not this year, but a couple years ago. You bring in a guy who is pretty good scoring the ball, and he's almost like a mini version of Jalen Brunson in a way, where obviously he's not as good as Jalen Brunson, but you don't have to change up what you're doing whenever he's not out there. So I think he fits the system very well and is a pretty good player. So I don't see any way in which this isn't an absolute steal for the Knicks because they don't have to dish out much money, and Jordan Clarkson's a great player. And then Trendon Watford signs for a 2-year deal with the 76ers. Watford's a pretty okay player. I mean, he's an average role player. He's a decent player, and you're not paying a ton of money, and he's a solid shooter. He's just a solid all-around player. I don't mind that deal very much. Gary Trent, going back to the Bucks, it's always a tried and true formula where if you have a guy who is super good at slashing, like Giannis Antetokounmpo, put as many shooters around him as possible, and Gary Trent is that. And then moving into the news earlier today, SGA signs a big deal. Congratulations to him. He's earned it. The finals MVP and one of the best players in the league. Good for Shea. Good for SGA. And then Gershon Yabusele signs a 2-year deal with the Knicks. Again, he's one of those players where he's a good scorer and he's a pretty good defender, actually. And I think he'll fit in very well with the Knicks and their, I'm assuming, tough-nosed defense style because they don't have a coach yet. Way to go, Knicks. But I think he'll fit very well with the team, and he'll overall have a pretty good place there, and the Knicks are adding to their depth, which has just been one of their big weaknesses. And then this is the bombshell. Miles Turner goes to the Bucks, and then the Bucks are waiving Damian Lillard and stretching out his money to pick up Miles Turner. Miles Turner's a pretty good player, and he fits alongside Giannis very well. But apparently Giannis is not happy. Shocker. The franchise superstar isn't happy that the team doesn't tell you that they're cutting someone who you gave up a ton of assets for. Shocker. I think Giannis wanted to be in on that decision. But I think, okay, I mean, I don't think Miles Turner's worth the same amount of money, roughly, as Damian Lillard. Obviously, it's not because it's over $25 million a year for Miles Turner, and Dame was making a lot more. But I think Miles Turner's a pretty good player. Obviously, in the finals, he struggled with shooting, and that's something that really matters because when you have Giannis, you need to put as many shooters around him, and when that shot is falling, Giannis and Miles Turner might be one of the best defensive front courts in the NBA because both of those guys are both elite shot blockers, and Giannis is a very good perimeter defender and a good help defender. So I think if Miles Turner gets his shot back, that could be a very, very nasty duo there. And then the Kings trading Jonas Valanciunas for Dario Saric. You get mini Jokic, and hopefully Denver can finally get a good center behind Jokic. And Jonas Valanciunas is a pretty decent center. I don't mind it. If it's just a 1-for-1 swap. I think, honestly, the Nuggets upgrade with getting Jonas Valanciunas because he's a player who plays pretty similar to Jokic, where he's more offensive leaning instead of defensive leaning. And that way you don't have to change up the style of play as much. Now, obviously, no one is like Nikola Jokic. He's a Hall of Famer for or will be a Hall of Famer for a reason. But going forward, the Bucks have been very active so far, and they agree on a 2-year deal with Gary Harris, who's a pretty good athletic shooter. He's a good player. He's a bit past his prime, but he still can be an effective voice in the locker room and a pretty good veteran presence. So I don't mind that deal. I don't see how much it is for, but I'm assuming it's for a relatively small amount of money, which got to conserve all of the money that you can. And then the Bucks are trading Pat Connaughton and 2 second-round picks for Vasily Micic. Pat Connaughton's making a nice amount of money, and I believe that would mean that the Bucks are able to shed $2 million off of their payroll. And whenever you have a team who I'm assuming is still trying to contend, if you can get rid of $2 million to have that go to another player, I think that that's pretty good. Now, obviously, you don't want to get rid of draft capital, but second round picks aren't exactly the most valuable assets. So I don't mind the trade for the Bucks. I think that if you want to get another backup point guard, because they brought back Kevin Porter Jr., if you want to bring him, if you want to get a good backup point guard, and Vasily Micic is that, and he has experience overseas and is able, hopefully, he's able to adjust to what the Bucks are trying to do. And then speaking of point guard, Dennis Schroeder, 3-year, $45 million deal at the Kings. Don't mind it. Do not mind it one bit, because the Kings needed a point guard, because I don't know if you really want Keon Ellis to be a starting point guard, but Dennis Schroeder's a pretty serviceable point guard. He's a really good player, or not really good. I'm throwing that term around too loosely. He's a very good role player, and yeah, he's a serviceable point guard. Obviously, it's not a long-term deal, but he's someone who can be there and steady the ship and can put the ball in the hands of, obviously, Domantas Sabonis and let Sabonis do his thing, because he's a very unique player with his playmaking and passing, and then hopefully Dennis Schroeder's able to capitalize and get the ball to DeMar DeRozan, Malik Monk, or Zach LaVine. How is a Bulls fan? Zach LaVine, you can get the ball to him. So I think that pretty good move for the Kings, able to get a good backup. And then later on today, Jericho Sims, a 2-year deal with the Bucks. Okay, I mean, Jericho Sims is an athletic finisher. Can't really do a whole lot else outside of it. He's mostly going to be a backup player, which he's young enough, so hopefully he can develop behind Giannis to sort of figure out the ins and outs of what it means to be a great scorer. Sandro Mamukelashvili signs with the Raptors. He was a good player for the Spurs last year, and the Raptors are kind of in an interesting place where they fired their GM after the draft. So kind of interesting to see what they do continuing, if they make any more trades or if they do anything else that's kind of out of the ordinary. And speaking of the Raptors, about 15 minutes ago, they brought back Jakob Poeltl to a $104 million extension. $26 million a year is a lot for Jakob Poeltl, because I don't think he's on the same tier as Miles Turner. I think that's a little bit of an overpay, but I can't be mad at wanting to keep someone there. And it's a pretty good, I mean, he's a pretty good center. He's not someone that you want to build around, but he can be there and be a serviceable asset, a good defender, and good interior finisher. So that is all of the free agency moves so far in terms of signings that, as of the time recording this. This is the Scoop with Coop. Hopefully you enjoyed, and I will probably have to make another video about this, because the NBA is crazy with all of the moves and everything like that. Again, this is the Scoop with Coop, and until next time.